Adelante.
Muy buenos días a todas y todos. En el
Good morning,
nombre
everyone.
del programa de
My
apoyo
name,
para la
on
ampliación
behalf
de la ambición
of the
climática
support
sostenible del
program
mundo de la
for
Tierra mediante las contribuciones
the
nacionales
environmental use of land
y el Plan Nacional de Adaptación
and the
a
national
Cambios de
plan
Escala,
for
medidas en niveles,
the scale program, the
naturaleza y seguridad
environmental
alimentaria.
ministry
Desde su
from
inauguración,
Germany through its climate
el
initiative.
Ministerio de Agricultura y
The
Pesca
Agricultural Ministry from Colombia, the program from the United Nations for Development, as well as the platform for climate action in Latin America and the Caribbean, and the organization from the UN for agriculture, and from the UN FAO. We would like to thank your presence in this webinar, where we aim to exchange experiences related to agriculture and the use of land and the implementation of actions and practices related to adaptation on climate change and benefits on mitigation. My name is Jorge Gutierrez. I'm the coordinator for projects for FAO, and I'm the focal point for the SCALE program in Colombia. So for the formal opening of this space, we would like to thank the presence of our colleague, Elisa Di Stefano. She's a consultant on climate management from the Climate Change Office for global scale in Rome. Thank you very much to her. Thank you for formally opening this space. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be here on this exchange on experiences and good practices related to mitigation and management on the agricultural field. I am Mrs. De Stefano. I work for FAO. I'm part of the team that works on the implementation of the SCALE program. As Jorge has told us, the program is being implemented in 12 different countries around Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Especially in Latin America, we're working in Argentina, Colombia, and Costa Rica. The objective of the program is to implement priorities related to the adaptation and mitigation policies from every single country, as detailed on the DNA. The program uses work from the public and private sector and has cross-cutting policies related to gender, social, and the sustainable development agendas. Colombia, internationally speaking, has committed itself through its mitigation and adaptation policies to fulfill the goals related to reduction. This is 51% of the emissions by 2030, and to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. That's for Colombia. And the country has also provided 26 adaptation goals related to water management, ecosystem management, and ecosystem services management, as well as agricultural services. So within the SCALE program, we have been working together with the offices from FAO at noon and the two ministries, the Agricultural and Rural Development Ministry, as well as the Environmental and Sustainable Development Ministry, in order to implement a set of practices that will enable us
compromisos de adaptación y mitigación. Entonces, en este evento
to get our mitigation goals. So right now we're going to take a listen to the progress, the experiences, and the learning opportunities related to adaptation, related to agricultural services, and how we can use this for mitigation at the level of countries and region. This event was organized aiming to maximize the outcomes of the climate policies from different sectors and to achieve the scale objectives, specifically speaking about the countries that we are talking about or where we are working. So during this event, we're going to take a listen to national experiences from Colombia and Costa Rica, regional experiences too. We're going to have interventions from different players, specifically from the representative from FAO in Colombia,
in
FAO,
Colombia
the agricultural ministry representative from Colombia. Also, we're going to listen to different representatives from the private and public sector too. So just to finish, I would like to thank the organizers of this event, and I would like to wish everybody the best during this interactive experience. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Elisa. Es muy importante para todos
Thank you,
nosotros.
Elisa. It is very important for all of us to get to know the tools and methodologies that everybody has used to identify the opportunities to implement adaptation opportunities that will contribute to the mitigation and the maximization of climate change mitigation. So we now have the pleasure to have the participation from the Agricultural Ministry from Colombia through Marta Marquez. She is a support professional from the environmental sustainability team. Thank you very much, Jorge, and all the organizers in this workshop. As you were mentioning, my name is Marta Liliana Marquez Torres. I'm a professional supporting the environmental sustainability team from the Agricultural Ministry. I want to use this opportunity to say hello to the person who is the director in charge of the innovation and sanitary protection team. This is the team we work with. They work on the formulation of policies and initiatives related to the management of climate change in the agricultural sector. I would also like to thank this opportunity within this framework. These experience exchanges are very important, as our colleague was saying before me. They are transformational in the agricultural sector. This is, to me, an opportunity to get to know all the actions that have been taken in different Latin American countries and to use these lessons learned in order to move forward in terms of our commitments. I would also like to say hello and say thank you to the experts from the global scale experts. I would like to thank him for this space. Our colleague in Colombia, Maria Consuelo Vergara, she's been working with us for many years now, putting together all these actions. I would like to highlight that these actions are all related to vulnerable communities, indigenous peoples, all these actions and models that we have named models related to sustainable production. We have been working together with her and all our colleagues from Costa Rica and Mexico and our Colombian colleagues who will later on will be listening to Mr. Gomez, Patricia Guzman. They are very special allies from the private sector. They are allies to the production sector, to the national sector in terms of complying with our commitments and actions related to mitigation. In the agricultural sector, I would like to say that this story related to support between FAO and PNUD, all these actions related to climate change, I would like to say that we have some specific outcomes after the actions together with them. We have a charter related to adaptation and mitigation to climate change. We have a climate change mitigation plan, which today has been enforced through an administration action. Here we have all these indicators that we have to abide by related to mitigation and adaptation in the agricultural sector, but PNUD and FAO has also provided us with some tools to be able to monitor and follow up all these actions. And today we can say that as part of the scale projects, as Zulema was saying, We want to be able to go to climate action, and I would like to talk about these instruments that have enabled us to develop this technical knowledge that enables the country, the agricultural sector, and the ministry to adopt these mitigation actions. We have taken some actions related to indigenous peoples' territories and rural areas, related to the practices that I have mentioned in previous projects that we have had in the past with FAO and ecosystem projects that are strategically important to us. Another instrument that is very important to us, as David is going to mention later, we are producing several guidelines to get certification of the agricultural activities. We have had some important work done with producers, with women's groups in the coffee growing area, in areas such as Huila. And we have also developed actions with the potato growing and other products in Cundinamarca and Boyacá. I like to highlight all these actions that we have developed under the Scale Colombia project. We are going deeper into these aspects later on, and I would also like to highlight the importance of the support or the action, the joint action that we have had with the production sector. And we have produced this vision for the production center thanks to the support that we have had with the coffee growing sector and the cattle sector, the rice growing sector. We have been able to integrate different actions in order to produce measures related to adaptation and mitigation to climate change. And the last thing that I would like to say about this, from the agricultural ministry, I would like to highlight the participation that we have as a country, Colombia, through my coordinator, Nelson, through the PLACA platform. This is a very important platform for these spaces where we exchange lessons learned amongst countries in Latin America. I would like to close with these remarks by thanking the organizers of this workshop, and from the agricultural ministry, we are going to be paying close attention to all the experiences from different countries. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Marta, por toda.
Thank you very much, Martha, for your presentation and the acknowledgement related to the work that we have been putting together with the agricultural sector in our country and together with different countries in Latin America. I would like to give the floor to our senior specialist, Maria Consuelo Vergara, who has been leading these aspects for many years in Colombia. Thank you very much, Maria Consuelo, for being here with us. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to everybody present here. It's a great pleasure to be here. First of all, I would like to say hello to Maya Tagachi, the representative from FAO in Colombia. And I would like to reiterate our commitment from us to continue cooperating with them on these issues, producing charters that will take into consideration resilience, climate resilience as part of our work. This is one of the main focus here at FAO. We are aware that all these commitments related to supporting food safety and having a more efficient agricultural sector, being more resilient in that sector, we will not be able to achieve that if we don't have in our agenda climate change as a focus point, as a focal point, as a point of action. So for several years, we have been working and looking very closely to every step that Colombia has taken in their climate agenda. We have been looking very closely and working together with them on the different goals and different achievements in this area. And as Martha was saying before, as Elisa was saying, today we can see that we have concrete goals related to the plan that we already have in Colombia as pertaining to the sector adaptation program. We have actions and we have outcomes already, but we have a lot to do yet. So the countries that are part of this network, we are working very hard and focus on our territories, but we're also aware, as this exchange, the title of this exchange says, we have to exchange what's happened practically, what's happened in the field with the agricultural workers, with farmers. We have many fields where we need change, not only individually. We are talking about changes related to institutions, technical changes. We're talking about changes at the plantations themselves. So this has a series of challenges related to them, and we have to work on them so we can show progress on them. So we'd like to share many things with you. I would like to be brief here, but I think Martha also gave us a very good breakdown on how Colombia has been working and the different work fronts that Colombia has. So we'd like this program to bring to the center of the action different players. We have indigenous communities with which we are working together, collecting their ancestral practices and contributing to these actions, but we also want the private sector, we want the different associations, and we want the different government institutions to participate, as well as other institutions in the sector. This work has been based on knowledge. We have been generating information related to risk analysis as pertaining to climate change, and this information exchange has enabled us to make decisions at the level of territories and farms, and at a national level too. I would also like to mention that by working with the private sector, mitigation and adaptation has been able to be adapted to coffee growing, cattle, as well as dairy products production. So I would also like to highlight that the Agricultural Ministry, represented by Martha, they were saying that this is a very big effort, and there is a very important characteristic here to highlight as pertaining to scale and the project that we have been working with other institutions. We have been ambitious. We have bigger goals every time, but we are following a step-by-step approach in the process. So that has enabled us to bring together a series of elements that enabled us now to position some tools as the certificate for adaptation on agricultural activities. This is something that we were able to achieve through the participation of different players, and we hope to adapt this in coffee growing farms in different areas in the country. We have many stories to tell, but we also have a lot to listen to in order to improve this work that we have done with FAO. What we have always been interested on, we want to include as part of our tools and our contributions. We want to be able, and we want to make sure that we hear the voices of all the communities, the experts and institutions too. So all these experiences that enable us to generate benefits in terms of mitigation and adaptation. We want to be able to understand them. We want to bring them to our work. And I would like to reiterate that our purpose is to have sustainable agriculture. We want to be more efficient in terms of our agricultural production. And one of the challenges here is to be able to position our integral management, climate integral management. And by doing this, by using the evidence that we get from our work, we're going to be able to achieve a whole lot more. So I hope this is a very productive day for everyone. And thank you for your generosity. Thank you for sharing your experiences, your recommendations, your lessons learned, not only the successes, but also all those things that we need to anticipate that are not going to be so good and that are going to help us along the way. We need to take that into consideration in order to avoid them in our processes. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, María Consuelo, por esta
Thank you very much, Maria Consuelo, for your reflections related to the actions that we are carrying out as pertaining to knowledge generation in the agricultural sector, not only in Colombia and Latin America, because as you were saying, Maria Consuelo, our work is related to making this kind of event possible in our countries. All the countries that are part of the scale program, what we have is an alternative here to share and improve our work by sharing our strengths in every single one of the countries participating herein. So we would like to start or continue our event by sharing with you some comments. We have here the ability to listen to different channels, Spanish and English, because we have different people participating who speak different languages, so you can listen to the translation. We're going to continue by sharing a presentation, a very brief one, on the issues that we are going to approach today. So we are going to be talking about the progress and the challenges that we have pertaining to climate change adaptation in Latin America, agriculture, and land use. We would like to start with these four premises that I think will give us a very good path going forward in terms of our discussion and the intents that we have in terms of the impacts related to climate change and agriculture. The first one has to do with agriculture. Resilient agriculture is possible. A prosperous, sustainable, driven agriculture is possible in Latin America and the Caribbean, and we're going to see how that's possible by looking at the cases that we have here for you. Premise number 2 talks about climate benefits to recover from the different impacts that in the agricultural sector requires investment, socioeconomic, environmental, but also climate changes. The third premise talks about regional transformation. We know that there are paths going forward to transform agriculture in the region that are related to being more productive, being getting more revenue or income and opportunities of development for our communities. And the fourth premise has to do with innovation and dialogue related to our knowledge. So innovation has also a lot to do with traditional knowledge, and this is related to enabling a dialogue. So based on these premises, we would like to talk about the challenges related to climate change adaptation in Latin America. And there are some numbers, some figures that are very eye-catching, and these are related to our reflections as pertaining to the path forward. We have 2.5 million, 2 million people who are not covering their needs related to having food available to them. 2.5 million agricultural workers are vulnerable to crisis and disasters. 1/3 of the produced agricultural products are wasted. And now talking about water, 780 million people have no access to potable water. And the demand increases 55%, is going to increase 55% by 2050. And climate change has these two roles related to water capture and climate change itself. We have been able to find
que los niveles más altos de concentración de
that
CO2
the highest levels of concentration in terms of carbon production is telling us
el aumento de las temperaturas mejoraría algunas
that the increase of temperatures is going to improve some conditions in some cases, and is going to help us to increase the production.
Sin embargo, en otras áreas, como la altamente productiva de trigo en Europa Central y Oriental, es probable que disminuya. Entonces encontramos estas relaciones de beneficio, pero impacto en otras latitudes. El aumento de las temperaturas puede afectar negativamente a los cultivos comerciales tradicionales, como el café en Brasil y África Occidental, y algún ejemplo particular sobre aceitunas en el Magreb. Sin embargo, hay mejores
However,
condiciones.
we know there are better conditions for to grow coffee in other areas.
Hablando de los cultivos alternativos,
Speaking of alternative crops and other changes in management techniques such as technology transfer programs, that will be needed in some areas where the growers are forced to change traditional patterns of crops. We cannot keep doing the same because of different transformation and drivers. And finally, the production of crops in areas will be benefited if we adopt better inputs and better implementation dynamics for traditional knowledge of the crops, which is something that we repeat in this meeting today. As you may well know, IPCC, in the Grand Panel for Climate Change, finally produced through these last few years the sixth assessment report, and every time more and more, there's no doubt that there's scientific evidence about the impact on food production. That's why there are different scenarios for temperature increase produced by GHG, both anthropic, and we see not only anthropic, and for example, corn production is one of the examples in the production areas globally, how this begins to impact as these scenarios of increasing temperature remain. There's a case that is really important to look into, and it's this line here, the dotted line we see, and it talks about that not all areas have agreements. What does that mean? It means that somehow we need to continue
Investigaciones que
to investigate, do research that strengthens these models. Similarly, we can see how the fields and the areas for fishing might be affected. A relevant aspect is the center of the discussion on the synergies of adaptation and mitigation, and we don't want to pass the opportunity to remind of to where we can, come to a common point in the crops, us to see what to leave us about in the country, what we can add to productivity. This is an important bridge in the area of biodiversity and ecosystemic biodiversity and work such as agroforestry. And on the other hand, the solution route based on nature-based solutions that gains more and more momentum, and we recognize an alternative, key global alternative. The role of Latin America is key. We see a lot of possibilities. We know it's a very key route to advancing sustainable development efforts and create new tools and actions, climate action, to achieve the NDC goals, the national determined contributions in our countries. Latin America plays a key role. It has 16% of the land surface. Now we have 23.4 of the forest coverage globally, as well as 31% of sweet water in the planet. Our biodiversity, let's say 12 of the 14 land biomasses, we have 50% of biodiversity in the world. We also have this graph. This is in terms of productive land. We have 576 million of hectares. So the call is to make a change in agriculture, which may increase our productivity and help us satisfy this expected increase. And somehow we can actually pass the expectations. About progress, there's no doubt that based on the results of the IPCC, we may identify that our agricultural systems, we identify more and more these implementation synergies and mitigation adaptation synergies that favor the sector to achieve the SDGs by 2030, as we can see in the graph.
Elementos sobre la transformación de los sistemas.
These are elements for the transformation of agricultural systems. Well, we require technological advance and new social realities. It's been proven, right? New appropriate technologies in small communities up to big programs that help facilitate this decision making. So it's important to deploy this timely, understand what the right time is for decision making, and there's no doubt that some might have additional costs other than the current process, but they'll be benefited and compensated by that win-win relation between mitigation and adaptation. Here are some key elements, what we've called the adaptation trajectory. We identify solutions in the global standards or global goals in this vertical access to work with the communities up to comply with the national policy and international policy metrics. Second thing is to understand this scale through providing tools in each dimension. And then finally, last but not least, the exercise to find new metrics. This is very rigorous work, especially if we talk about adaptation. We understand and we generate new metrics is one of the important challenges today with the global adaptation metrics to understand the traceability guidelines. We have that responsibility. We need to visualize what are the efforts that we are deploying. Finally, our perspective, our forecast, it shows that we need resilient territories to produce more food, to understand the strength of traditional knowledge is a key access to reduce vulnerability before climate change. And finally, we need to build communities with adaptive transformation processes as a key to structure the local, regional, and national policies. So we want to leave you with a very open and rich discussion landscape. It'll be enriched by these presentations I'll be listening to today. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we continue now with our colleague, Manuel Gomez. I want to introduce very especially the work that the Colombian Federation of Cattle Raisers has been doing. It's the first experience to share about adaptation mitigation in the productive sectors. In this national representation section, we're going to hear three cases. The first one on sustainable livestock. It's a very interesting program in our country regarding the resilient proper management of rice crops. And finally, a program that we are developing, the framework of the Escala Colombia program.
De una agricultura.
Certificate of Agriculture Adapted to Climate Change. We want to welcome Manuel Gomez again. He is a veterinarian with a specialty in statistics. He's participated an expert in the formulation of very important projects, particularly for the country in our NAMA on livestock, the National Property Mitigation Action Program. He's been a consultant to the EU in production costs in the livestock sector, and he's a representative in Colombia for the AgRanch mark, led by the German institution. He's the director of a sustainable livestock area in FEGAN, the Colombian Federation of Livestock. Okay. Oh, we thank you for sharing this experience of our colleague. You have 10 minutes. Thank you for participating.
Muchas gracias, Jorge. Un saludo.
Thank you, Jorge, and warm greetings to everyone who has joined this meeting. I'm going to be sharing. Please let me know if you can see my presentation on your screen. Okay. Great. So, thank you for the invite. I want to thank Scala, FAO, and of course, everyone who's listening. Throughout this presentation, I'll be covering the experiences
ganadería sostenible que en los
on
últimos
sustainable
años
livestock in the last 15 years, something that we have worked as FEDEGAN, the Colombian Federation of Livestock Owners in Colombia, with the support of these institutions that you see on the screen.
minutos vamos a
I'm going
ver
to take these minutes and we're going to see
cuatro temas.
4 topics.
Primero es el contexto.
The first is the context. I'm sorry, I think I'm losing his voice. The sustainable
De agricultura y desarrollo rural.
livestock NAMA.
Tenemos también el sello ambiental
We're going to see the Colombian Environmental Seal with the standard 6550 that talks about the sustainable livestock of the Ministry of Sustainable Development together with the Colombian Institute for Technical Standards. To give you the context of the 114 million hectares that we have in Colombia, about half of it has some sort of activity, agricultural activity. And within that agricultural activity, we see constant crops, forests, of course, grasslands, and I'll be focusing on livestock, which probably is about 22 million hectares, what it occupies, out of which we have a commitment at the Federation, Colombian Federation of Livestock, to have sustainable use, to make a sustainable use. That's when the last 15 years, our sustainable livestock program seeks to reconvert, intensify certain areas within the agricultural frontier, and then return close to 10 million hectares to other activities, many of other types. Especially forestry, we want to tell you also that we have a herd of about 30 million bovines, 640,000 growers. Many of them are small growers, small producers. And we do this, of course, seeking to achieve adaptation, mitigation, of course, resilience to climate change. The livestock sector and the agricultural sector, we contribute close to 6.8% of the generation of richness in our country. Our GDP, especially livestock, contributes with 1.4 of our GDP. Livestock, at the same time, contributes with close to 22% of the agricultural GDP and 48% of the pecuary GDP. So let's look at the mitigation actions, the national appropriate mitigation action, NAMA. There's a special feature, this NAMA in Colombia. It started from within each piece of land. It means we have the information, we have the inventory information, we have land use information from each 640,000 pieces of land or plots, including the NAMA. And along that, we want to probably achieve ownership of knowledge to manage ancestral and traditional knowledge and combine it with the technical knowledge and have a nice combination for new knowledge to build resilient livestock. We do this together with the supervision of the World Bank, with the funds of donations of the UK, and of course with our partners to deliver these mitigation actions that are flagged and led by the Ministry of Agriculture and and Rural Development. We see that our contributions, as it's been pointed out before, we are emitters, but at the same time, we also have a wide chance, a big chance to be sync, also to certify carbon removals through different systems. Here we participate in Colombia with about 15% of the emissions that comes from enteric fermentation, manure management, treatment of organic waste with applied practices, especially for fertilization, and we focus a lot on knowledge management. Now, what our proposal in this livestock NAMA? We want to typify or sort, if you wish, through conglomerates, and that's how we did it. All the livestock activity, and in these conglomerates, we apply these actions. As such, we can see the country, this is Colombia, and the prioritization that took place in the conglomerates and the typology, because it got it's close to 25 million hectares and a very important number, close to a third part of the livestock are in the Orinoco.
y un escenario.
Thus, we have different scenarios, moderate and optimistic scenarios to be able to use two
Luego,
baselines.
la zona de
We
suroriente,
have the southeast, the Magdalena Medio area, of course, the North Caribbean, the wet and the dry Caribbean areas. They have specific actions in each region, especially in the Andean region as well. Now, what did we see as a lesson learned? First, this graph that you can see on your screen, this is the graduality, how we apply these actions that start from knowledge management and through different land use transformations. Knowledge management begins as one of the first strategies. Why? Because it is the one that ra- raises awareness. It seeks that our growers and ranchers understand and begin to work hand in hand with the institutions and the public and private institutions. Then we have the dispersed trees in plots. We have 1.2 million hectares in Colombia in silvopastoral characteristics with these trees spread throughout plots. We have with live fences, and here we are transforming land use, and then we begin to have with different banks, silvopastoral systems. Everything with graduality that indicates in the last 15 years at least how to apply this so that the different regions begin to look for that adaptation, begin to achieve adaptation. I know you cannot read this because it is very small font and full of content. We want to leave it with you so that when you look into this, you might go over it. And of course, the document of the NAMA that we'll be sharing with you, since now it's available for every one of you. It shows land actions, water actions, of course, the preservation of water basins. The livestock does not go straightly into the water sources. Say the conservation areas, the restoration areas through silvopastoral systems. It's all associated to animal well-being, and of course, all the social aspects that support for example, this initiative, for example, uh, fair jobs, big support to small growers, and so on. So these are practical examples of 51 demonstrative farms that we have. This is close, actually. It's in a region called El Guaviare. We're a grower. We support him, a producer. We have these 100 hectares of silvopastoral systems.
un árbol nativo,
It's a native species, also with a bush and different varieties of trees and branches. Causes that with this production system, we can intensify production, but at the same time, we protect and produce and protect, promote forests to capture much more carbon. We determine through measurements that there could be between 5 and 8 tons of CO2 equivalent that is captured, mitigating, and it's a very important reservoir, and it's more than neutral. Carbon neutrality is actually positive carbon for the carbon sinks and removals. Here we show some very practical actions to establish the objectives and identify the sources and sinks of the GHG gases. And I summarize this with monitoring MRV, right? Monitor, report, and verification, so that we can monitor these areas and look this let's say understanding of all producers. In the last part, we can talk about the Ministry of Health, Environment in Colombia. As we said, the MADS, the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, has helped us, has accompanied, and the agricultural fair welcomes everyone next July. We can see some samples there of the first 12 certified Colombian livestock companies with a Colombian environmental seal,
de agricultura,
with the help of the
del
Ministries of Environment and the Ministry of Agriculture, the Colombian Institute of Standards, called Icontec, of course, a legal representative, the executive chair, Jose Felix, and also Jaime Daza delivering or presenting these 12 growers. They're going to be given the certificate of the Colombian Environmental Seal,
la norma técnica NTC
which the national standard has produced for the different types of livestock. These are the principles. I'm not going to dwell on here, but these are environmental principles for best practices in livestock worked hand in hand together with ICA, the Colombian Agriculture Institute, and the responsibility to employees. These certificates, our mission is to have a very big number in the next 4 years, supported by the national government. And we want to have farms with a Colombian environmental
Cero
seal,
deforestación y muy buenas
zero deforestation, and very good practices. Now, to conclude, I can say that the mitigation, nationally appropriate mitigation actions, NAMAs, also our NDCs, these are policy strategies that we support as the FEDEGAN, the National Federation of Livestock, through a decree called 00126, so that we can achieve the reductions of 51% of GHG and then 30% of methane by 2030, and look for carbon neutrality by 2050. Of course, the environmental seal in Colombia, like I've pointed out before,
refuerza todas estas acciones.
strengthens all these actions, and there's a special invitation on July 1st. We'll be holding the World Day on Sustainable Livestock, and the host will be Colombia. So we are invited as of now with this event. Everyone is cordially invited, and we actually expect your participation. It'll be from 8 to 9 in the morning in Colombian time
Estas métricas y ese
to talk about these metrics and see or hear about the Colombian commitment in the livestock sector. I'd like to conclude that with this Colombian Sustainable Livestock Program, we seek metrics. We want to transform land use, but always we want to have this very important element, which is monitoring, reporting, and verification, AMRV, of these 160,000 hectares that we have delivered, where over 25,000 people inhabit these systems with these intensive silvopastorale systems. We also want to reduce emissions, and together with the World Bank, the UK, and the German government, Norwegian government, of course, and international cooperation, we thank them because we seek actions together, and we want to do more work in the future for traceability, zero deforestation. It's a very important goal that we also coordinate with the Ministry of Mines through environmental compensation. And here's the literature review. And I hope I didn't take more than 10 minutes. I did take longer than 10 minutes. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Manuel. Muy juiciosos.
Thank you, Manuel.
Aquí con la
Thank you
gestión
for
del
keeping
tiempo.
up with the time. As you could see, there'll be a chance to ask some questions later. If you have questions, we encourage you to write them down in the chat box. Something to highlight in the different achievements of sustainable livestock in Colombia is precisely that we want to work at different scales. We heard from Manuel about specific cases, about silvopastorale practices, and we can see how they have come to this national scale with also an international impact. Speaking of the NAMA, the metrics behind all this in the work with the community. So again, thank you very much, Manuel. Everyone's welcome to ask their questions. We want to welcome now
Siguiente caso, nuestro siguiente
to
caso.
the next case. The next presentation is by Fede Arroz, through Patricia Guzman, who is the Deputy Technician Director at Fede Arroz, the Colombian Federation of Rice Growers. She has a master's on project development and the development of appropriate technologies for different crops, especially emphasis in vegetal safety. She's been an advisor, and she's participated in different knowledge transfer programs for greater profitability in rice crops. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you for participating and sharing your experience of this very interesting process that is interesting for our country. And the public and our attendees are very interested in listening to you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Please allow me to share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. Yes. Thank you. Again, thank you for inviting me. I'm going to share this case, something that we have tried to do as a guild. We want to achieve sustainability of our rice crops. We don't want to, of course, undermine the need to grow rice. Rice is a very important product in the Colombian basket, and it's also a very important product for food security in Colombia. And I think many of our countries feel the same way. So for our National Federation of Rice Growers, Fede Arroz, we need to grow rice, good rice production to respond to the needs of our consumers. But at the same time, this production should be sustainable. Just to give you a little bit of context, rice in Colombia is 560,000 hectares. It's been around for 5 years that we do not reduce more than 500,000 hectares. That's good news. So we can sustain consumption or respond to consumption. Colombia is about 3 million tons needed for our consumers. So for us, it is important, very important that we see further productivity and competitiveness and profitability for growers, but always seeking the best management of resources. It's about 16,000 growers, out of which 82% are male, the rest is females. We have 69% of our growers are small growers with less than 10 hectares, but we have devoted time to see how we can make sure this sector is more and more productive and more competitive, sustainable, and so on. So we need to pay attention at the same time to big growers because that provides 70% of the grain that we use in Colombia. As a result, all the technology, all the development that we have used to grow rice is a benefit for all the population, all the growers. As you can see, rice is grown in almost throughout all the Colombian territory. We have 1100, over 100 municipalities that grow rice, and it's not only for growers, but everyone who's somehow related to the rice chain, the supply chain. We're saying up to the little stores in some towns such as Saldaña, Purificación. These towns, small towns, they depend basically on what they grow. Has a very important part of their livelihoods because they don't grow anything else around those towns. So it's very important that we be profitable and competitive. Based on these findings and after the research we've done in the framework of these, or with the resources from the National Fund for rice crops, we began to think, what can we do so that all growers adopt new technologies, the right technologies? And that's how we created this program. It started in 2012. It's called AMTEC, the Massive Adaptation of Technology for a Productive System. This is not just technology for rice, but of course our call is to promote rice crops, especially to apply to rice crops. That is a type of technology that has basic principles that are applicable to any kind of crop. And for us, this rice crop, corn, all other systems is really important to be really competitive and manage resources properly. The objective is to transfer together all the existing technology. It should be adapted to each area so that we can increase productivity, reduce costs, and we have less impact on the environment. We are convinced that in spite of the fact that we are seen as a very crop that wastes, quote, unquote, natural resources, we've been able to prove that if we grow rice and we're friendly to the environment, we can achieve productivity and so on, and we can contribute to everything about reducing emissions and the efficient use of the soil and water.
Our main strategy is to be integral. This is not actually one practice that we need to work on. We actually have to work to start with on diagnosing what we have in each area, every farmer, every lot, because not everybody produces in the same way. Not all the soils are the same. not all the water resources are the same. So we have to do an initial diagnosis and to plan each action that you see here. And we have parameters for every single one of these resources. We have steps that we have to follow in order to produce rice. So this is just the way to look for the ideal cap for every lot, for every technology, for every producer, for every farmer. And this is why we need to do a follow-up on everything that we do as part of the process. And as I was saying before, as our colleague was saying before, we actually need to do some monitoring work and an assessment of every single thing that we find in the field. So from 2012, we have begun to do the work. And as you can see here, and as you're going to see in my presentation, you can see how we began in 2012 with two areas, pilot areas, one in Meta and another one in Tolima. And as we moved on, it was very difficult for the farmers to actually start and adopt and take into consideration the technologies that we were trying to transfer to them. And they didn't have the infrastructure, they didn't have the equipment back then. But as we moved on, you are going to see how we moved on in terms of hectares that we started to work with, and we started to show as pilots. So other farmers and producers started to copy our technology, because our purpose here is to have a transfer model, and our main objective was to get the farmers to use these practices and to share the knowledge. So we started generating an impact on the rice growing sector in Colombia. You can see here how we started moving forward with our pilots, with the work of the farmer, because we need an attitude change from the farmers to start with. So the farmers are now starting to adapt the technology. You can also see how the cost by ton compared to the United States to the left, all the lots that we started to work with and apply the Ampere technologies, the cost per ton was lower than the one in the United States, because that's one of the risks that we have. We are importing rice from the United States due to the free commerce treaties. So that's why we want our farmers to produce based on lower costs per ton. So as you can see here, as the time went by, the capabilities of the agriculture producers, they became more competitive, and their abilities increased. So you can see how more lots started to be part of our program. As we move forward, 2019, the previous slide, 2020, 2021, and 2022. So all of these are pilot lots that are using all the Amtech practices. And I want to show you the outcomes of those lots, or those plots that started working with us. We started doing some very precise follow-up too, in terms of the recommendations and assessing all the things that had to be implemented. So this is the outlook and the outcomes that we have had, the performance of the party of rice and the growth in terms of national production. Here we have the performance in terms of dry and irrigation. The light green is dry, and the darker green is the national average between 2003 and 2022. And here we can compare the performance that we have had, the yield that we have had with Amtech, applying our Amtech technology as time goes by. But a very important thing here, if you take a look at the gap, the big gap that we had between the national average and Amtech average as we started, compared to what we have right now. So the gap, as you can see, in terms of productivity is smaller between the national average and what we produce with the farmers that have adopted our Amtech technology. Now you can see here the gap difference. And anyway, this is work that we have to continue doing, so we can close completely the gap between these two production sectors. So here we can also see the national average between as compared to Amtech, and the average that we get from the national sector. So the difference is 11%, as you can see. dry and irrigated. But what I wanted to show you here is the impact that we will have if every farmer will apply Amtech's technology. As I was telling you before, we have about 560,000 hectares. If we go up to 587 kilos more, we will have a great deal of rice, additional rice, and we will be able to turn into white rice. And if we go there, we will have the ability to feed a whole lot more consumers, and we will have a whole lot more rice to deliver to consumers. So this is one of the very important things that we have to work on to close the gap. The impact that we have had nationally speaking in terms of adopting these technologies is about 50 to 60%. It changes year to year, but we also know that in some areas we have greater impact than in other areas, and that's where we are trying to get more farmers and doing more field work to change that, because the areas where we don't have a lot of impact, that's where we want to go in. So this is one of the indicators or tables of indicators that I wanted to show to you. The national average that's allowing us to improve, but we also have a potential to improve productivity in Colombia. We can go farther than that. We can improve the Colombian productivity. The best lots that we have in Amtech, we can have 8,000, 9,000 kilos per hectare. Colombia has that potential. That's what this table is showing us. If we use our technology in a very strict manner, especially when we have the seasons here, because that's another important issue that we have worked on in terms of resilience to climate change. That's something very important to us, as you know. Another important issue here is fertilization. As you can see here, we have every year we have a less reduced use of fertilizers. That's a less greenhouse effect gases, even though the costs go up, but the use of fertilizers goes down in the lots that we have in our pilots. Another thing we have done is work on biofertilizers, organic fertilization. We can see here that the production costs have been reduced, of course, but we haven't had an impact on the yields or production. We have reduced substantially in organic fertilizers, and that's something that we have also applied as part of our technologies, the technologies that we introduce our farmers to, the application of chemicals, agricultural chemicals, herbicides, advances. We every year we apply less of this, and because of import rates or tariffs, the amounts the amounts of chemical products that we use is reduced year by year. So this is a summary of the competitiveness that we have in terms of how competitive we are compared to the US. And the cost per ton nationally speaking is also lower during the last few years as compared to the US. We're using less money to produce as compared to the US. Last year, US had a very big problem related to climate change, but we have an average, we assign an average to the US for last year, and we're still competitive if we use our Amtech technologies, and that's what we're working on. Nevertheless, I want to emphasize on all the work that we have done related to mitigation and adaptation, the transfer of technologies that we've had in our project. We're working on mechanizing soil preparation. That's what we are doing. We're minimizing that work in order to reduce the movement or to perturb soil. So we are reducing, when we achieve that, we are reducing the damage, and we have a mitigation strategy here. So we are also mitigating the risks when it comes down to putting the seed to the ground, and this is a mitigation measure. Talking about managing water efficiently, we are working on irrigation using AWD technologies. and other technologies related to taking water to specific places. We have reduced up to 43% of water use. And in terms of reduction of greenhouse effect gases, together with the agricultural minister, we have realized that we have reduced up to 42% of the emission of these kind of gases. Nutrition management is always based on the use of fertilizers, using soil analysis, and producing recommendations related to variety, weather, and the soil that we have available to us, and the availability of water too, based on a platform called SIPA Web, which is available to all farmers. And sanitation management, we do not apply anything if we have not monitored this, and if application is not strictly necessary. That's another mitigation aspect that we have in terms of adaptation. Climate information dissemination. This is something that we started back in 2011 with the Agricultural Ministry and CIAD. We did all this work trying to find real-time information for farmers, for decision making, for things related to best practices and mitigation and adaptation. Now we have a platform for the management of adaptation to climate change. This is a platform that we can use to manage this climate change information. This is something that farmers have access to all the time. So also resilient variants. This is something that we've been working on with different rice growing associations. We're working on temperatures and water requirements and water management. This is something we've been working on in terms of practices related to soil adaptation and using different irrigation methods. This is something that I wanted to share with you related to the AMTEC program. And thank you very much for the invitation. And I'm here to hear any of your comments.
Patricia, muchísimas gracias.
Patricia, thank you very much. It is very interesting, all the efforts that you have put together. In this case, they are quite remarkable. The integration of all the actions that you have put together is very important. We have learned that adaptation actions are not strictly related to answering a question, but we need different strategies to answer a single question or challenge that we may have in terms of adaptation. I think this is something that we saw during your presentation. You showed us actions, different actions that you took in order to manage climate change in your sector. If you have any questions for Patricia, please do not hesitate to ask them, and we will share them with her. We definitely believe there is a lot to learn here from her. Now, to close this initial block, I would like to give the floor to Javier Ricalda, who is our specialist and our professional related to climate change, FAO Colombia. He's an engineer with over 15 years of experience related to climate change decision making. He has experience related also to moderating climate change viability projects, and he has also worked in putting together adaptation metrics in different projects. He is part of the Scale Colombia project, and today he has a presentation for us related to the certification of agriculture that is adaptive to climate change. So please go ahead, you have the floor. Hello, thank you, Jorge, for your introduction, and thanks to everyone for sharing. Thank you, everyone, for sharing or spending this time with us. I think you can see my screen, right? So what we are going to show you here very quickly is the process that we are undertaking in order to define what's going to be an agricultural certificate as pertaining to agriculture. resilient to climate change.
Entonces, vamos a hablar un poquito
So we're going to talk about the objective of the certificate, the concepts that we're trying to implement as part of the implementation of the certification model, the learning that we have had in the field, and the steps to follow as part of the framework of the certification. So the main objective of the certification, as our colleagues have mentioned before, agriculture is one of the responsible factors as pertaining to climate change, but this is also one of the main sources of mitigation and solutions to be provided to this big challenge that we're facing. So with our certification efforts, we're trying to foster adaptation projects that farmers are trying to adopt. We're trying to foster these adaptation efforts that they're undertaking as part of their daily activities. Also, as a secondary objective, we are aiming to define the requirements that we're going to take into consideration when it comes down to awarding the certification, provide ways to implement adaptation. So this is not a certification that is based on milestones or practices. We are aiming to certify processes. So when we talk about the issues related to the certification and its main focus, we decided that the certification has to be based on processes. Why? Because adaptation itself is a continuous improvement process and is something that aims to have a system, an agricultural system that provides resilience to climate change. So under that train of thought, we have decided upon 3 different stages. The first one will be knowledge exchange related to climate change. The second stage will be design and execution of the adaptation, whereby we aim that the practices that are being undertaken they are considered a layer that is part of the long-term management plan, and we do a follow-up on that. And the third stage will be related to control and monitoring the adaptation. This is different to mitigation processes where the technology and the methodology is already there. What we're aiming to do with this certificate is to generate indicators or adaptation metrics that will be useful to us to have a global view of the adaptation process, not only related to management, but also impact. We want to measure the management efforts. Sometimes it is very difficult. The main challenges that we have when it comes down to understanding adaptation, they have to do with measuring impact. That's the main challenge. So this certificate, its main purpose is to have a global methodology that will enable us to quantify in the agricultural sector, in this case, the adaptation impact that we're having through the measures that we are implementing. So here we can talk about another concept, which is related to adaptation concepts. So as I told you before, adaptation is a long-term process that could take 20, 30 years very easily. And measuring such impacts, that's what's complex, because projects work in this way. So we are aiming to certify a process that goes beyond whatever the project could last. And the certification should also be sustainable long-term. So what we're trying to get through these certificates is to go beyond the certification that is based on action or a response, which is something that is related to the traditional perception that we have of risk. So we have a risk and we have a response to that. So we can change irrigation, change plantation. What we're aiming with this certificate is a transformational adaptation through by means of changing the production system. We want to be able to measure the impact. So when we go beyond the impact, we can say that we have adapted. So along this line, we have a process called incremental adaptation, whereby actions are still aligned to the impact. So the certificate has been conceptualized from a standpoint of integrality. So to do this, we took into consideration a system. We took into consideration 4 different components or areas or pillars that need to be certified, that have to be certified. So the first one is the soil. Soil degradation is the loss of our production and capabilities. So this is something that is being experienced globally. We also assess the ecosystem as an integral system. We take into consideration plantations, ecosystems, value chain issues, social issues, and we also take into consideration risks, because as I said before, adaptation is a long-term process, and there are countries such as Colombia, where the climate all the climate or areas or zones are so dispersed that it has a different impact based on the area. So we have a series of indicators, and it is very important to highlight this here. The indicators here are a strategic part of the process, because depending on where we have our focus, that's what we're going to be able to measure and certify. So we are doing a very studious work in order to assess what areas need to be monitored. So those adaptation processes are carried out properly. So we're talking about 120 indicators that we can monitor, and we continue working on them, because talking about adaptation processes, beyond indicators, something very important is the scale. Adaptation is a process that is based on the lot itself, on the plantation. So this is something that is very specific. So a given farm may have an adaptation process that is different to the next farm over. So the certificate is being put together so we can have an integral vision of the system and its process. And we are working on 10 different regions and 4 different producers. In Nariño, we're working on potato and coffee. In Huila, we're working on coffee growing farms, and we're generating synergy with the municipality. And we are going to have Huila, and we're going to have the first project which is adapted to our climate change strategy, and we're working together with the municipality to achieve that goal. And this is one of the first places where we're going to have this certification. We also have a project related to veggies and onions in Boyacá. So we are working on different crops, and because we have a diversity of crops here, we are trying to work on different aspects that are very important to the certification process. So as we told you before, this is something that is taking place in different areas, and what we're trying to generate awareness about is the processes and the work that different farmers efforts that they are carrying out in their areas. So we're working with producers who are leaders, who have a lot of visibility in their territories. So it is easier in the future to establish these processes. And very quickly, I would like to show you what we're aiming to do with the certifications. We want them to be a space where we manage knowledge related to adaptation, and we want these efforts to be replicable, easy to be replicated locally amongst other farmers. But we also want these efforts to be scalable from the bottom up, in order to be able to share knowledge related to how this is being done. So this is an overview on how the portal works, and this is an overview on how this system is being built. So we can open the certification processes and make it scalable at a national level and international level too. And I think this is the end of our presentation. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a Xavi por
Thank you very much, Xavi, for your presentation and telling us about the progress as pertaining to your certification related to climate change resilient certification. So here we're taking a step ahead in terms of understanding metrics. And as Javier was saying, part of the objective here is to take a look at the different scales, the different crops, different geographies, different places. So here we want to open the floor for international colleagues. If they want to participate in the development process, they can do so. There are some questions here, Javier. When we go to the Q&A session, we'll let you know about them. So we are finishing this block, the national participations. I would like to thank them. And now we want to open the new block where we are going to go to Costa Rica. We say hello to the scale program coordinator from Costa Rica, Arturo Ureña. He's a forest engineer, and he has a special degree on project management, preservation of forest resources. He also has great knowledge related to agricultural policies, and he has experience also on the formulation and monitoring efforts for projects in Central America and the Caribbean. You're going to see that he has a very interesting experience on another one of the scale countries, in this case, Central America. So please go ahead, Arturo. Jorge, thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you very much for being here. I think you can see me on the screen, right? Yes, we can see you. So thank you. First of all, I want to thank the organizers, my good friends and colleagues from Escala, Colombia. Jorge, hello to you and everyone in the team. I want to thank my colleagues in Costa Rica. They are connected, and we have different colleagues from Perleche and Penuque, different associations with which we have a very nice relationship. Something to tell you, during this implementation period for Escala in the country, because I only have 15 minutes, I want to focus on the very basic, on the basics, and in the future, maybe we can share more information on things we're working on. So we were talking a few months ago about things that we wanted to do in Costa Rica, and now I can tell you very happily that we have started to get some outcomes through very specific actions. So I would like to tell you that our colleagues from the cattle growing area in our country, they also say that cattle growing in Costa Rica is different. So the truth is that it's been so because our statistics system shows that we have cattle production in our country that is very small compared to Argentina, Colombia, Paraguay, and other places where the cattle industry has a bigger scale. Here in Costa Rica, we have very interesting information related to cattle production, which is 1.6 heads in the country for different purposes. And this is where NAMA, which I mentioned before, and our FEDEGAN colleague mentioned before, it becomes very important because its purpose is to produce more in a smaller area. And what they are trying to do is that heads of cattle per area, per hectare is smaller, but with a better yield. What we share through the Colombian case, our model right now in Costa Rica is just an intervention model. This is also a mechanism that our country proposed in order to implement our low carbon cattle growing. And we also want to mitigate in terms of greenhouse gas production. That's what we're aiming for.
Es parte de esta iniciativa y es una meta país, porque todo el
It's part of
esfuerzo.
our initiative is a country goal because the NAMA effort is included within the national strategic plans within our sustainable livestock policy in our country. There's also a policy from the agricultural sector and national decarbonization plan as well, includes it, all aiming at contributing to the our NDCs. At the end of the day, NAMA is an instrument that is pretty well installed, not only in livestock. We have also a very well-established NAMA for coffee. We have a coffee NAMA, rice NAMA, and sugarcane NAMA as well. So it's also something we've been strengthening and achieving great development by livestock and NAMA, and the coffee NAMA are the most developed ones. I can also tell you also that the NAMA initiative in our country is expected to be a market mechanism where there's a seal and a quality mechanism that is also explained and mentioned by our colleagues. And this is a point, of course, MRV is a mechanism that it drives the improvement of techniques through reducing emissions to make more adapted farms and greater profitability. We've been also talking about including within our NAMA the initiative of payment for environmental services 2.0 PS, where we recognize the organic carbon in soil for any actors that do good soil management, and always seeking to improve the ecosystemic services of biodiversity, water, trees, and of course other derived benefits, additional benefits more than carbon. Right now, May 2023, we have over 2,500 farms participating in this mechanism. And the idea is in this year, from here to 2026, we want to include another 1,200 farms. It's an effort that we've been doing in our country. There are almost 40,000 livestock farms, but it's just a beginning to see people who want to do things differently to produce livestock differently. Now, the livestock NAMA in 22, just last year, showed very interesting figures. We achieved 88.51 of all the national farms, the livestock farms, I mean, 32,000 cases of animals in the demographics, 77,000 hectares of impacted grasslands, which represents 14.4% of the national livestock. There are 101 technicians applying MAG. They are duly recorded or registered in the National Agricultural Statistics. Is the NEA. They follow up the NAMA initiative, and there's data in the increase of carbon in soil with an additionality of 1.4 to 1.8 tons per hectare. There's interesting data about the increase of profitability between 11, 19%, and the statistics to 2022 report a reduction of almost 190,000 tons of CO2 equivalent.
Esta iniciativa
For
pretende
2026, this initiative intends to achieve the 1,200 farms that I mentioned before, achieved 13.8% in comparison to the national standard with 100,000 animals per farm, increased the profitability to 18%, reduced another almost 160,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. And in font, in bold, you're going to see that there's a big interest from the government and this initiative to begin to develop PSC, payment for environmental services, and also a mechanism for differentiated milk and meat products. And how does Scala fit in all of this? I want to tell you about this because based on Scala, we wanted to support and articulate many of these actions in our country, but with an approach that we've also been applying with different sectors and different institutions. We're working with a multi-stakeholder approach because we have a good environment with the Ministry of Environment and Livestock Agriculture. They're interacting openly and transparently in an articulate manner and also amongst agencies because we want to make sure that Scala brings together other initiatives of the UN system, bring them to this process. And okay, we can tell you that we began to do interesting things. And one of them was the colleagues from Corfoga, the corporation in Costa Rica, had big interest to have a certification center. It was called bovine meat produced with zero deforestation. Is a very aggressive standard. Thinking of controls, and we aim at a scale and say, okay, let's try to pilot this in some selected groups. And we were very concerned because the results that we expected that would be produced by the application of a standard would not be as promising because it's very rigorous, very strict, by the way. But it's interesting to see that we began to generate very interesting, promising data. And we've conducted 2 assessments in 14 pilot farms in the Brunca region in Costa Rica. And we found after this analysis that almost 70% of the farms comply with the requirements established by the standard. And with the small changes that growers have been carrying out, it doesn't mean a big investment. And you may see that as a result of this application, 80% or 66% of the productive units achieved from 80 to 90% of the requirements. They were able to comply with the policy. I mean, there are some farms that establishing the standard and the policy, they already have the certificate if we produce this officially. But remember, it's just a pilot project. We're just kind of calibrating, measuring. There's a small percentage, 13% of the farms that did not get to 7% of their requirements. They could not comply. But we found that there are some very big opportunities to increase the score with a little investment, basic investment. There's also interesting data that we found, and is that the registries is an issue for problems. It's a problem. 30% of them keep good records, but the rest is an area, a barrier for producers. So we see an opportunity for work together with these growers. Very interesting. I can tell you that the traceability and the application of these policies was very well received by growers. However, there's an issue of timing that we need to polish better with them. And of course, we need to do investment. The biggest investment need arises in fences and to establish water sources for these pilot farms. Also, in Scala, we want to see how the application behaved with the technicians in the field, how they welcomed it. And not only that, but we wanted to make it stronger, make the enforcement of the policy stronger. And we contracted a study to analyze the SEDA in the region using satellite images from Sentinel, also some other layers that are also available by NASA. And they are free access to those who wish to, you know, look for it. Why did we do this? We are talking about a standard where we want to have a differentiated product of meat free of deforestation. Well, we need to prove it. We need to show it off. So we conducted this study, this work. We updated the layers, and we also automated a tool that is called Muku, which allows us to monitor, do MRV of the productive units regarding the loss of earnings of forest coverage. We've done some training for the growers and the technicians on how to use this tool so that a polygon in a farm may also be compared based on the information of loss and gaining of coverage, and then we can provide more robustness. This was updated to 2022, and now there's an interagency interaction. I mean, they want to continue to update it to 2020, so on in the coming years, even scale it up to a national level. Okay, number two, things that we've been driving. Of course, I want to share with you that we started with this initiative of recarbonization of global soils, our red soil initiative, as we call it. And I'm going to tell you why. Because we've launched several, we conducted some training workshops, and we launched this initiative in our country with the support of the ministries. And we already have very interesting engagement of the private sector and the government. They're working here on this initiative. I can also tell you that there's an agreement letter. It's ready to be signed by FAO and the National Forest Financing Fund to have a seed capital to recognize these growers who demonstrate that in their farms they are doing recarbonization actions on the grounds, on the soil. It's good news because in the pilot project, there were only 20 farms of milk livestock, and now we have another 20 farms of the coffee nama to apply these measurements of the protocol on the measurements of carbon in the soils. So it's all been established, and unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to show the results of the measurements, but we hope that by July, we can report the first data on the results of these assessment of the red soil protocols in these farms of, again, livestock and coffee farms. At the same time, we are already working on the soil doctors. In the end, the or soil protocols. This is to strengthen the health of the soils. And Rexol mechanism is very much similar to what we've seen in environmental services in Costa Rica. We focus on NAMA farms to apply two protocols, one on the visual assessment, another one on the analysis of soil lab sample analysis. It's an interesting part of Rexsoil. Once we overcome a given score, they can be given a recognition, which is given by the National Financing Fund for forests, for that organic carbon in soils, what is being retained in the productive systems. So these are just some images of work we've been doing to accompany the program as a measurement to train growers and technicians on how to measure the health in soils in their farms and in their coffee farms, in some of them. We can tell you also, we can report that based on these images I share on the screen, it's a very important achievement to us, especially by the teams that have been working with us in our country, because we've been using tools, geospace tools, to generate this kind of information that is applied in reg soil. In Costa Rica, it has to do with altimetry, I don't know, slopes, curves, and so on, and taking advantage of the technology that we've been given. And we've produced this thing, for example, what you can see on the screen. These are the sample areas for reg soil in one of the Spinos cooperatives, one of the partners in the private sector in Costa Rica, and where we have the application with tools to select the sampling stations and do all the surveying, all the sample collection, and then take them to the lab. So that is a very important point to us. We're going to be doing this in the 40 farms that we are already included in the mechanisms. They've been included. And so we've noticed that we need to reinforce this um, initiative. I can tell you that in Scala, Costa Rica, we've been wanting to get into the assessment or the application of a new roadmap, for example, for gender and social inclusion related to livestock and coffee activities in the country. So We have leveraged some funds, not so much, but at least it gives us an idea, at least a chance to begin to talk about these topics in these two sectors, which particularly have very interesting dynamics. I can tell you that we've started to do things. We've approached the institutions you see on the screen, the Ministry of Agriculture, the different institutions listed here, the livestock chamber, and we have the Cafe Federation of Coffee. It's not included here because it's gonna join the coming weeks to look at how things are happening there. But notice there are already some findings in very summarized fashion. I'm sorry, it's very short time to show the analysis that we've done, but we found that definitely there is a visibilization, lack of visibilization of the domestic work and the work of women and how much they cooperate to the production activities. There's an overload of work amongst women, and that contributes to gender inequality and less or fewer economic empowerment opportunities for women. There's big difference. There's one more thing, interesting thing, that is the principle of obligation. Unless there is this, the institutions that participate, many of them, those that participate, well, not all of them, the measures to ensure the participation of women, they are non-existent or they're none. We found also that the needs for training of the officials and public servants, especially the government level, is key. There are people who look at gender, but they not necessarily have the training on the topic. They're not properly trained. Maybe they're not suitable and they're not doing it as well as they could. We've also found that the administration of farms, especially, is done by other people, not women, not the landowners, and sometimes there are project opportunities or benefits, but not necessarily it is women who do the activity all by itself once the project arrives or the initiative arrives. And there are big questions also in some of the sectors and resilience to work on projects where they focus to help working and producing women. So that calls our attention for the work we can do from now on. It's talking about awareness raising and also some other contributions we make in from our side along the process. Okay, having said that, oh, I want to tell you also that there is a roadmap for our work. I can tell you that for June, July, the remaining of this month, and then July, we'll be completing the measurement of the Rexroad protocols in the selected farms. We'll share the data. We have the agreement letter to be signed to recognize the growers that are going to join the program. That is an important milestone in our country. We have foreseen that from July to September, when I share the results of the certification plans per farm, actually in July, we're going to be holding a workshop in the South area to share the results of the application of the standard. And also, we have built some plans for farms where we can ensure that the farms that are a little bit behind, they can catch up and we can comply with the standard. And we can how this associates to the certificates and this available information so that it can be escalated at the national level. We have a market study for bovine meat. There's a tender now in the UNDP website. It's published, and so you can explore it. And if you know about institutions that may have a technical financial offer, it's welcome because we are along that process right now. And also in August, we would expect to complete the roadmap to have social inclusion to turn into a possible work plan for another initiative, and maybe through the Scala initiative, we can have some additional leveraging. Okay, I think that's the end of my presentation, and I want to thank you and thank everyone, and tell you also, the colleagues from FEDEG, that there's a big interest from other colleagues to have an exchange, and I'll be talking to Jorge, see if we can have that experience exchange and begin to work on these topics, which I believe are of common interest to our initiatives. Thank you very much, and I'm all willing to, answer questions or hear comments. Thank you, Jorge and colleagues.
Arturo, muchas gracias a ti y a todo el equipo de trabajo.
Thank you and all the work team. Thank you, those of you who are doing the work in the Scala Costa Rica program. There's no doubt, well, that there are results and there's interest. Yes, of course, we'll keep in touch with the NAMA and with Fedegan in Colombia and to do joint work because we have common points or common interests. Okay, we want to give the floor after exploring all this work, hearing about these very enriching experiences from Costa Rica, our colleague from the UNDP, Alexandra Sosky. We were interested in hearing, we wanted to share, first of all, with you what's being done about mitigation and especially the carbon markets. Alexandra is a technical advisor, global technical advisor for these topics of carbon. I'm sorry, his voice froze for me. I don't know if it froze for everyone. It's probably a problem with his signal. His image froze. Hello?
I can hear you.
Yeah, but I think his voice froze.
Ah, okay, Jorge's, yeah.
I cannot hear Jorge anymore.
Okay, but I think, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so
Go
maybe
ahead.
I can just go ahead and start. Okay, so yeah, good morning and thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. As already mentioned by Jorge, I'm Alexandra Sörzer, Global Carbon Technical Advisor and Manager of UNDP's Carbon Payment for Development Initiative. Today, I will give a brief overview of the state and the trend of carbon pricing schemes globally, and then a quick introduction of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which provides new opportunities for project financing, and then how UNDP addresses the new challenges of carbon finance. And last but not least, I will present a case study where carbon finance is used to implement climate-smart agriculture practices in Ghana. So next slide. In 2022, there were 68 carbon pricing instruments operating around the world, with 3 more scheduled for implementation. And this includes 37 carbon taxes and 34 emission trading schemes. Approximately 23% of the total global greenhouse gas emissions are currently covered by operating carbon pricing instruments. And China hosts the world's largest carbon market by emissions. And over 2,100 liable power stations are participating, covering about 4.5 billion tons CO2 per year. Over 30% of China's total GHG emissions. So this is a massive emission trading scheme already operational. And pilot emission trading schemes or carbon pricing approaches are also being considered in several other countries, including in Colombia, but also in Turkey, Thailand, Vietnam, and Pakistan. Next slide. In the international carbon crediting markets, under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, the new rules and guidelines have been agreed finally at COP26 in 2021. And they provide now more certainty for project developers. And we hope that this will lead to a growth in carbon markets in the coming years. Article 6 refers to 3 mechanisms. Article 6.2 mechanism is where parties engage on a voluntary basis in cooperative approaches that involve the use of internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. They can be used towards a country's NDC, also international purposes such as CORSIA, but also for other purposes. And under Article 6.4, which is the new market mechanism and replaces the CDM of the Kyoto era, and is an instrument that will contribute to mitigation and sustainable development. It is not fully operational yet, while Article 6.2 is already operational and the first projects have been authorized. And Article 6.8 is a non-market approach and promotes adaptation and mitigation, but it does not involve any transfer of units. But there are also concrete implementation challenges for these new mechanisms. For example, the use of internationally transferred credits for ITMOs is limited to one NDC cycle. So the cut-off date at the moment for all forward contracts is the 31st December 2030. And no banking of these credits is allowed. And for a market, this is a limiting condition, and it might create instability for projects at the end of each NDC cycle. It has also been agreed that Article 6 projects require corresponding adjustments in host countries' NDCs. The key challenge with these corresponding adjustments is that they add a level of political uncertainty to project developers, and will require investors to look at the country's capacity to authorize a project and conduct the corresponding adjustments in the future. And we have already heard from investors that project authorization risks related to these corresponding adjustments is becoming really a significant investment risk to consider. Next slide. But to help address these new complexities of carbon markets, UNDP is providing targeted support on Article 6 through the Carbon Payment for Development initiative. One key component of CP4D is its Article 6 transfer readiness assistance. And the most important readiness support that we provide relates to the development of the Article 6 regulatory framework or rule book. There are different names for it, but it guides the implementation of Article 6 projects and provides a robust, broader framework for carbon markets. So most countries want to see in these frameworks also voluntary markets and Article 6.4 and 6.2. Such frameworks have been completed for Ghana and Vanuatu. Ghana's and Vanuatu's frameworks are fully operational, and the first projects have already been successfully authorized. But we are currently supporting Georgia, Ukraine, Malawi, Morocco, and Uruguay to develop Article 6 frameworks. But in addition to that, and in order to respond to the Article 6 capacity building needs, we have developed together with UNFCCC and other partners a self-paced online course, which was launched on UNDP's Learning for Nature platform in February this year. And it will also be soon translated into Spanish. It is already translated. It is just not transferred to the platform, the new course, but the translation has already been completed. So it will soon be also available in Spanish. We are also working on a digital infrastructure together with UNFCCC, the World Bank and EBRD to develop an end-to-end digital system and to simplify the workflow for project developers, but also streamline approval processes for governments. Next slide. And as a digital solution to improve the ITMO implementation processes, we have set up the Carbon Cooperation Platform. The security of this platform was assessed by the UN International Computing Center and, of course, approved also by UNDP's Information Security Team. All ITMO processes, the project processes, can be managed and implemented on this platform. And this is done through registered country users, but also validators can register verifiers and, of course, project developers. The key feature of this platform is that it is modular, and therefore we can easily amend it and scale it. So we can easily add new countries and quickly, because the different modules are already, or steps in the ITMO process flow are already completely coded and have to be put together in the flow that each country wants it to be implemented. But to improve monitoring processes of ITMO projects, we are working on web apps in general, but we completed one web app and including a photo monitoring feature for the agricultural project in in Ghana, and I will show you a screenshot of this web app later. And this web app is linked to the monitoring module on the platform to allow project developers to upload the monitoring information directly to the platform. And from there, it will also be accessible to focal points in the government, as well as verifiers, project verifiers. Next slide. And the second key component of the CP4D initiative are direct financial incentives for ITMO project implementation, so for carbon project implementation. We can pay for up to 6 million verified ITMOs or carbon credits, which are generated between 2023 and 2030. We engage with project developers directly, and these project developers must have the financial capacity to upfront invest in projects. And we are also encouraging public and private partnerships with governments. And the financial incentives are then paid ex post based on third-party verified or on third-party verifications. UNDP's total budget for these ex post payments or carbon payments is 120 million. Next slide. Ghana, as probably many already know, is really leading Article 6 implementation, and it is the only country with a fully operational Article 6 framework and the pipeline of projects that is already lined up for implementation under Article 6.2. Ghana has included all categories of anthropogenic emissions. And removals in the NDC, except the emissions from the agricultural sector, because of food production system, because of the vulnerability of the food production. And agriculture is also a main source of livelihood support for the rural economy in Ghana. So it was not included in the mitigation section of the NDC. However, agriculture was considered an important sector in the adaptation section of Ghana's NDC because of its importance for food systems. And climate smart agriculture, according to Ghana's NDC, can create up to 200,000 jobs in the country with more than 4 million beneficiaries and a high gender responsiveness. But in order to achieve those targets in the NDC, in the agricultural sector, funding of up to $1.8 billion is needed. And Ghana has therefore included agricultural projects with high sustainable development benefits from outside their mitigation section of the NDC in their policy framework on cooperative approaches under Article 6.2. So basically in their Article 6 framework. Agriculture is now one of the eligible sectors in their Article 6 framework. And this framework includes a pre-selected list of technologies that are considered additional to the NDC and therefore eligible for carbon finance. Next slide. On November 23rd, 2020, the government of Ghana and the government of Switzerland signed a bilateral agreement on cooperative approaches under Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. And this bilateral agreement sets a framework or the framework conditions for bilateral cooperation in Ghana. The new partnership enables also the adoption of green and low carbon technology solutions. And it encourages now also investment, private sector investment into Ghana's NDC. And it opens the doors for projects that can empower communities, including farmers, to be part of the low carbon development pathway of Ghana. But one of the key objectives of this bilateral agreement is to enhance climate smart agriculture. So this agricultural project was part of the list of activities from the very beginning, even before the bilateral agreement was signed. Next slide. So under this bilateral agreement with Switzerland, the promotion of climate-smart agriculture practices for sustainable rice cultivation in Ghana was the first authorized project, but not only in Ghana, also globally. The project promotes the adoption of alternate wetting and drying, AWD, for rice cultivation. And AWD has been identified as an effective climate-smart mitigation measure and reduces also inefficient water management, as you for sure know. The ITMO program provides targeted technical trainings to farmers. So this is one of the key components of the carbon project, to provide targeted trainings and monitoring support to farmers. Because most of Ghana's, or all of Ghana's rice farmers, except some small pilots, have already been introduced in the past and applied AWD, but more in the context of research. So Ghana's rice farmers are used to flooding their rice fields throughout the cropping season. And this practice leads to significant methane emissions. But through the application of AWD, rice farmers can reduce methane emissions by up to 50%. And in the end, the ITMO program is expected to lead to the adoption of AWD on almost 80% of Ghana's rice production areas. And the project itself, as it is designed, will reduce 1.1 million tons CO2 up to 2030. Next slide. So methane is in wet or in paddy rice soil is produced by anaerobic decomposition of organic material after the flooding of rice fields. And the main vectors behind methane emissions from paddy rice fields are methane-forming bacteria, which perform well under anaerobic conditions and transform carbon into methane through the methanogenesis. And allowing the fields to drain during the cropping season removes these anaerobic conditions for at least a certain period, and therefore it holds the production of methane during this time and reduces the total quantity of methane released during the growing season. And the estimates are that it is around 50%. At least this is the ex-ante estimate. Next slide. But multiple studies have shown that AWD has also significant benefits over conventional rice cultivation. So AWD reduces, for example, water consumption by reducing the number of irrigation events by up to 30%. It can help farmers cope with water scarcity and increase reliability of downstream irrigation water supply. Farmers who use pump irrigation can save money on irrigation costs and therefore see also a higher net return from using AWD. And in the 2006 IPCC methodology, AWD is assumed to reduce methane emissions by an average of 50%, as already mentioned, compared to continuous flooding. And combining AWD with nitrogen use efficiency and also management of organic inputs can further reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. AWD has also an increased net return for farmers, and studies from the International Rice Research Institute, but also other research centers, so for example, the Philippines Research Center, show that AWD may in fact increase yields. So there are studies that show that it increases yields by promoting more effective tillering and stronger root growth and rice plants. And similar studies were produced by Cornell University, who is currently also implementing a large project in West Africa, including in Ghana. AWD may also reduce labor costs by improving field conditions at harvest, which would allow farmers to apply mechanical harvesting. So there are significant co-benefits from the application of AWD, which go beyond greenhouse gas emission reductions. Next slide. However, in order to access carbon financing, stringent MRV is needed. So the term MRV originally came from the Bali Action Plan in a negotiated text of the UNFCCC in Bali, or the text was negotiated already in 2007. So since then, the basic understanding of the Bali Action Plan is that climate change mitigation actions shall be implemented in a measurable, reportable, and verifiable manner. So this is a key or core concept of all carbon finance activities. It integrates three independent processes: the monitoring or the measurement of GHG emissions, the reporting, and the verification of emission reductions. Each process is, of course, independent of the other, but it refers to it, MRV refers to it as a system approach to carbon finance. And it requires all three processes to be implemented. Next slide. For the AWD project in Ghana, we monitor through a web app, and you will see on the next slide a screenshot of the web app. The following parameters are calculated. So the water regime on the field and the dates where the water regime is changed from one status to another, the sowing date, the fertilizer application, organic amendment, crop protection activities or applications, rice straw management, if any, and at the end also the yield has to be recorded. The web app has also a photo monitoring feature. The web app is linked to the monitoring module of the Carbon Cooperation Platform and allows project proponents to upload monitoring information directly to the platform, as already mentioned. And this can even be done from a mobile device. And then the information can be directly accessed by the government, by focal points in the government, but also by third-party verifiers. But based on the total established area, a sample size will then be determined for the verification and will be calculated through calculation software. The samples will be randomly selected in the database by the system itself, and this will have to be repeated every year. So, and on the last slide, you also see some onboarding pictures from the last couple of months. So the project is already under implementation, and farmers have already started to monitor the implementation of AWD. The expectation from the government is that this AWD project, which of course does not cover the whole rice production area, will have a transformational impact and will trigger the change to AWD also in other regions that are currently not targeted by the project. So the target area of the project is 30,000 hectares. And this area will be implemented with AWD twice a year. Yeah, so that's it from my side. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share this project, and please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Alexandra. Es muy importante poder conocer la visión de estos procesos que se
Thank you very
están
much, Alexandra. It's very important for us to get to know about international projects, their vision, their mission, and their progress in the global perspective. Many things to highlight here about the methodology, the focus areas, the availability of information, and the way it's got reach and impact in other countries. And I think the main takeaway here is that precisely this is very dynamic. This is a very dynamic scenario. And this is also a scenario that offers a great deal of interaction, because mitigation actions are very important every day, and understanding the markets also and the way they interact with all these dynamics in different countries enables us to focus our mitigation actions in order to contribute to the market, to the carbon markets. Thank you very much, Alexandra, and thanks everybody for your presentations. We have taken a few more minutes than anticipated, but we wanted to share all your experiences, all the countries. Now we want to open the floor to our colleague, Freddie, who is a specialist in the private markets in Belgium. He has worked in different projects related to mitigation. He has worked with OCDE also in different markets in that organization. So I want to open the floor for him, and I would like to share his presentation right away.
Thanks, Jorge. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Buenos días para todos y muchas gracias por la invitación. My name is Laporo Freddy, and I work indeed at the FAO Office of Climate Change in Rome. So today other speakers discuss the Scala approach, but I want to focus on the specific aspect I am following of this program, that is support the 12 participating countries to meet NDC and NAP commitments by joining hands with the private sector. So in the next few minutes, I want to present some examples picturing how the program is translating this goal into practice and which lessons we learned so far in some of these countries. However, first, I would like to start with a brief context on why this private sector work matters at FAO and what is the strategy for engaging with these actors. The nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, specify a clear role for the private sector in agriculture and land use. And in a recent analysis led by our team, we individuated that about 40% of enhanced NDCs make explicit reference to engaging private sector in a follow climate actions. But what does it mean? In fact, the new FAO strategy on climate change considers this data and underlines the importance of aligning climate change work with the FAO private sector strategy to engage with agribusinesses. And in its private sector strategy, FAO envisions that it engages with the private sector primarily to first support and scale up innovation, second promote investments, then also mobilize scientific expertise, and finally generate data for SDG monitoring. So the strategy at the same time also recognizes that engaging with the private sector involves risks, and therefore explains in detail the importance of adequate due diligence processes. Next slide, please. This slide shows some examples of channels of engagement we have as an international organization with the private sector. And these comprise policy dialogue, capacity development, resource mobilization, technical cooperation, knowledge and research, innovation, advocacy, and data sharing and dissemination, so capacity building. Next slide, please. So this was briefly the general approach at FAO. As a Scala program, we also have an approach that sits within the bigger FAO approach, but we aim in particular to work with the smaller companies, primarily to engage them to become more resilient, invest in more sustainable practices, and also access finance to do this. We also aim to work with global companies to build their resilience and reduce emissions across their supply chains. We also aim to work with foundations and associations and federations developing co-investment ideas with the actors mentioned before. And finally, Scala aims to co-create with all of these actors investment projects with private sector partners to allow them access funding, for example, through the GCF or the GEF. So our private sector strategy goes more into this, and if you want to dig more about this approach, you have the link on this slide and on the slide before. Maybe we can skip this slide and the next one since we are already late, Jorge. Thanks so much. Yeah, we can also move to the next slide. And yeah, this is a very important slide because before jumping into the country examples, we need to make sure that we understand what is the definition of private sector. And here we can see a bit of the actors that we consider as relevant for private sector as per the FAO private sector strategy. So this is the private sector in a large sense, covering all agri-food systems. And these comprise primarily, of course, the farm level, so producer organizations and cooperatives. Then it covered the micro, small, and medium enterprises that we call MSMEs. We have the large national and multinational companies as well, the industry and trade associations, very important too, philanthropic foundations, and the last but also really central, private sector financial institutions, such as banks or equity funds. Next slide, please. So now that we have mentioned all the strategic elements, I want to show how some countries are translating this into practice in our program. And the sample case I want to talk about is Senegal. The government in Senegal requested to develop agroecological practices in the millets and the groundnuts value chain, as these are priority commodities for country adaptation, and they work well in crop rotation. But this example is relevant also for other countries because it applies to any value chain and any country that has maybe different priorities. So through the mapping exercises in Senegal, we first identified the relevant private sector stakeholders of these specific value chains. We identified some champions, that is actors that had a big stake in transformative sectoral action, a big potential. In our case, that was the Senegalese Organic Fertilizer Association, for example. And then as a second step, we launched consultations with these federations, but also potential groundnuts buyers, as well as technology providers, to understand at which level of the value chain there was the highest potential for public and private collaboration, and at which level each of these partners was seeming to have problems within their value chains. So these discussions, by allowing us to identify specific entry points, allowed us to come back at the potential financial partners with whom we had parallel discussions and present concrete financing options, as well as understand which were the requirements of each potential donor. So in the case of Senegal, the main financing options for concept node development will probably come from a bank, the Agricultural Bank, which has a portfolio on sustainable agriculture and is accredited by the GCF. But we also had several discussions with other private equity funds that are accredited with international financing mechanisms, such as indeed the GCF or the JEF. I think I will ask you to skip now the other country examples. So if we can go to the slide with the big table. We also had, by the way, another great example of private sector engagement by our colleague Arturo from FAO Costa Rica that previously illustrated some of what was happening there. But if you want to go back at these examples, you can. Jorge, if we can skip also this slide and the next two slides. Okay, next slide again. And next. So we cope with our delays in the timeline. This slide exactly. Here we make a bit of a summary of the overall involvement of the private sector through our program. On the left side, we listed all the partners we're discussing with and that could be financing some local action. Primarily, these are global agri-food companies and investment funds or blended funds mechanisms. On the right hand, we show some of the examples of private sector partners that would be involved in the implementation of the projects to be financed. And that these are organizations informed activities to be designed through consultations about their situations and needs. And these are primarily local federation and cooperatives, as well as domestic agri-food companies. You can see that, for example, in Thailand, we are consulting just as an entry point with the Thai Aquatic Livestock Federation, which has the biggest market. But through these consultations, we want them to open to other companies to enlarge this approach and have the possibility to speak with as many producers as possible. Next slide, please. So to finish this presentation, I would now like to illustrate some of the key conclusions we learned in this first phase of the program. One of the first conclusions is that identifying and involving relevant private sector actors at the co-design stage of an initiative is essential. And why? Primarily to ensure that who launches an initiative considers private sector interests and needs adequately since the beginning. And second, because if the due diligence process is not successful, then we are just losing time in discussing with a private sector partner that we cannot work with for that can be political or ethical reasons. Another factor is that involving actors with the largest representation potential, such as federation and cooperatives, like those that we heard about today with our previous colleagues' presentations, is key to ensure an adequate representation of all the producers. Second conclusion is that cost-benefit analysis is key to ensure private sector interest and involvement. Why? Because during consultations, we noticed a clear interest by the private sector in collaborating with international organizations. However, both beneficiaries and financing partners usually do not come at us with proposals, but are waiting to receive clear entry points. And a cost-benefit analysis and risk assessment is the basis determining the interest by the private sector in collaborating or not in a specific climate program. And subsequently, yeah, it's interesting to prevent like these eventual issues by programming at the project management level, hiring market experts or cost-benefit analysis analysts in project activities, and also in the budget of the program. We are developing at Scala a guidance on how to lead this cost-benefit analysis and also risk assessments. The third point, finally, that I want to share is that in parallel with who needs to bring the local private sector experience in terms of needs, also discussions with potential financing partners needs to start as soon as the project is launched, because also from their part, there is a strong interest in financing climate action in Afolu. But it's true that they require specific details in terms of risk assessment and cost-benefit analysis, but there is no point in waiting for a final product to discuss with them, especially because each potential donor or financial partners demands specific technical requirements in how to formulate a funding proposal, and also designing activities in order to target those specific requirements by each donors needs to be done at an early stage, maybe even at the cost-benefit analysis phase, and allows to save a lot of time when formulating public-private climate initiatives. Next slide, just to conclude, because this is all from my hand. I do not know if we have time for answer questions live, but please do not hesitate to reach out in case of need. Thanks very much, Jorge and colleagues.
Muchas gracias, Lapo, por la
Thank you very much, Lapo, for your participation, for showing us your progress in one of the countries that you have had the opportunity to work in Africa. And something important to highlight where you talked about specific needs from each one of the stakeholders. It is very important this search for tools in many sectors, in many cases. It is very important to take that into consideration, how all this comes together. I think we lost him. We lost connection. I would like to finish then with the presentation from our colleague Fernando Romero. He's the current director for the Mexican Government Agricultural Production Office. Thank you very much for participating in this event. Thank you very much, Jorge. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you to Escala. Thank you for having us here. Let me know if you can see my presentation. Yes, we can. Okay, so first of all, I would like to share this experience with you. This is something that we went through last year, and this is something that we had related to local resources. Can we move forward? Please share your presentation in presentation mode. Okay, thank you. So first of all, what's PLACA? What is it all about? This is a voluntary cooperation mechanism by means of which we aim to share information amongst countries, agricultural information, and information related to climate change. We launched this platform back in 2019. This has a structure shared by all the member countries, 16 different countries in Latin America and the Caribbean as of now. And every agricultural ministry, they assign a focal point and a contact point to. So the secretariat is composed of FAO, and there is a presidency and vice presidency. Costa Rica is the president now, and the vice president is Mexico. So the platform, we have 4 different work groups that have been defined and organized by the members themselves. So we have mitigation and adaptation, coordinated by Argentina, and other related to public policies, coordinated by Chile, and we have a follow-up group
knowledge transfer and good practices plans. There are associated
coordinated
institutions
by
and links to
different
other
countries.
networks.
We
As you
have
can see
different
here,
networks.
the World Miracle
We have
Organization,
weather
Conservation
a
International, World
group.
Bank,
We have an
and a nuke.
innovation and
They're part
technology
of these
group led by Guatemala.
institutions. Okay, in the framework of the work plan that we have for us, as like I said, we have some well-defined objectives. One of them is to share and transfer knowledge, which will help us strengthen the technical capabilities of the professionals in the agricultural sector. In the framework, we decided to launch a contest. I told you about this. It was last year. We took these 5 steps first to launch a call for all the extension shareholders. We defined the term light. Then we received the proposals, and something interesting here. To assess the proposals, we integrated an assessing grading committee. It was formed by 10 professionals from different countries, 7 countries. Each one would check and review the proposals that were submitted. Once we assessed and we had the assessment criteria for these proposals, we announced the selected proposals and the framework of the results. We held the event. What did we obtain? We received 83 proposals, and we can see here on the right-hand side of your screen how it was integrated, who presented the proposals. 25% of them were technicians, and so on, researchers, rural workers, advisors, everyone. We had the presentation by proposals from growers, some others that were not, but they were there. Even students that were doing masters and PhD students. What countries submitted proposals? Well, we're holding an event that coordinated by Colombia. It was the first country, was Argentina. Colombia was the highest numbers, followed by Mexico and so on. Chile, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Dominican Republic. So these are the countries that presented their proposals. 83 proposals that we received. Now, what we're defining is this same group. I'm sorry, his voice is cutting. I don't know if it's me or for everyone. But I can. His image. Hello, can you hear me? I think we lost him.
Parece que me desconectó.
I was kicked out of the meeting. Yeah, you're back. We can hear you now. Let me share again. Sure, go ahead. I'm sorry. No worries. I was just saying, I don't know how far you heard me. The same committee helped us assess and assign the I don't know, the allowance for each proposals. 85% or 55% of the proposals was for both mitigation and adaptation. 34% was only adaptation, and 11% was only mitigation. About the sector where we apply the solutions, 68% of the proposal was the agricultural sector, 18% in 8% in multi-sector, something about agriculture, about 6%, and 8% was multi-sectorial, 18% was livestock. Multi-sector was the three sectors. This is a number of proposals. We try to group them as to what the main topics were, what they covered: aquaculture there, genetic resources, production systems, technology. As we saw before, there are a lot of experiences with the organic fertilizers, pest control, and so on. And the same thing for livestock and multi-sectors. These are the 83 proposals we got. Okay, where can we check this? We ran a process and we decided to launch this call, and we felt it was important to have a platform or some module where we could include, where people could find, we could group and people could find interesting information about these solutions that are applied, because we believe that locally many of the communities, there are experiences that somehow have been adapted to. They might have seen them somewhere else, and they try to adapt them to their own countries with their local resources. That's an important point that we wanted to highlight: the use of these local resources, and many times they're not assessed properly. Many materials are recycled with any high cost for these growers, and they can reuse them. So that's something we wanted to do, to highlight, identify the solutions, and make them available to others. So where can you find this? You can visit this website, the PLAC website. There's a link or the QR code. You can access it, and you'll find there a Padlet where you can see, and we've identified at the country level, the points where the proposals are located. You can click on it, and it'll display an image, as you can see now, the document which you may download in PDF form. About the process too, the assessment process led us to get some winners, okay? These were the winners: 3 technical professionals, 3 academic researchers, 3 advisors, 1 producer, and 2 students. These winners received an award, a prize, with access to courses or diploma courses. I show some of them here with Mexican University. They offered 2 scholarships. Also, Flaxo, they offered some scholarships. The FAO platform on rural finance. The same course at Earth University in Costa Rica. And 5 opportunities or places given by the CNR in Chile, the National Risk Commission in Chile, depending on the capabilities and the experiences of each one of the producers, or actually winners. Okay, this year we launched recently, actually today, we launched the call to continue with this contest. This is the 2023 version with the same scheme or similar, a very similar topic, and we invite you, we encourage you to participate, to help us spread this information in the call for now. It's been launched today. You can check it in the platform. And should you have any question or comment about the process, we'll be pleased to answer. There's the email. You can get all the information and we can answer your doubts and we'll be pleased to answer. Okay. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity to participate.
Fernando, muchas gracias y muchas gracias a la
Thank you very much, and we want to thank the participation of Placa. It's a platform that gathers these dynamics and particularly the knowledge creation, which today is something we can share. We're going to try to close the part of the presentations. We've heard about climate solutions implemented at the international level. We've seen some local examples also in the region. So this facilitates building synergies, taking advantage of the potentials of the environmental and agricultural sector for our governments, the regional, local governments that may be interested in this sector and particularly in the climate action. The co-benefit analysis of mitigation, it has a reason as a way to examine this contribution of adaptation projects, and it turns into a very useful tool in the search for integration opportunities. Also to exchange experience in order to channel and strengthen and also start alliances and partnerships for transforming climate action. We want to thank you for attending. We ask you that you share your questions. Many of the answers have already been given in the chat box. Share your contact information with us for South-South cooperation. Thanks to the SCALA program and the IKI program by the German government, it's been possible to hold this event. We want to thank everyone, those of you who have been behind there. The cameras, our colleagues from the SCALA Colombia team, also the Global SCALA team, and also the support, communication support from FAO. And thank you again. Please do not doubt to continue to keep in touch with us through our FAO channels. There's a website for the Scala Global Program. Do check it, do visit it, and follow us on our social media, where we be uploading the information. We're going to post it in the social media. And again, please do click on the different social media that you'll find about our agency. Again, thank you very much. Hope to see you next time in the next opportunity. Have a great rest of day. Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Hasta luego, buen día.
Bye. Good day.